Hi, everyone. I'm Leah Hines, Executive Director of the Charleston Conference, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our Health Sciences Special Issue panel discussion. It is for an upcoming issue in September of Against the Grain, and we have three of our featured authors that are going to be joining us here today: David Bender, Liz Lorbeer, and Pamela Rose. So thank you all three for joining us. Before we get started, I'd like for all of our attendees to take just a minute to introduce themselves in the chat box. So if you go to the attendee chat and just let us know your name and your college or university, your institution, your company, just let us know who you are and where you're from. We would like to be able to say hello to you. Hi, Carrie. Thanks for joining. While you are doing that, introducing yourself, hi, Letisa in Michigan. Everybody, hello. A few just brief announcements. The webinar is listen only, so we can't hear our attendees, but we do have the attendee chat box that you're using now so that we can talk to you. For any questions on content during the presentations that are coming up, there's a green question mark icon that you can use to ask a question. We're going to do Q&A at the end of each presentation. So David will go first, and then we'll have questions for his presentation, then Liz, then Pam. If there's anything that we don't get covered in the 5 minutes or so, the attendees or the presenters rather have agreed to stick around after and do a little bit of wrap up if there's questions that we can't cover. If you're having trouble with the audio, there's a kind of a telephone icon that you can use to switch to use your phone for the audio instead of having it come through the computer. You'll still be able to see the screen and see the presentation, but the audio will be through the phone. Sometimes that helps if there's any kind of an issue. The webcast is being recorded. We're going to make it available on the conference website within just a few days after the session's over. The slides and everything will be available there also. So again, if we miss anything or have to go through the slides too quickly, all that material will be available for you. And now I have just a couple of quick poll questions. So thank you guys for introducing yourselves. I would like to know, what type of attendee are you? If you can just quickly let me know if you're a librarian, publisher, vendor, consultant, and if it's other, let me know in that attendee chat box. I'm interested to see what other types we have here. So 85, 86% librarian, 88, 12% publisher. The vast majority of librarians here. Oh, there's a vendor. 5%, 10%, 85. Okay, we'll let that open for just a second more, but it looks like 85% librarians right now. Thank you. Final poll question. Since we are doing an intro to an upcoming Against the Grain issue, the one that's going to be coming out in September, are you an Against the Grain subscriber? I'm thinking most of the people here will be, but looks like I'm wrong. That's interesting. Well, Against the Grain is a journal that came out of the Charleston Conference. It is designed to continue the conversations that were started at the conference and bringing together publishers, vendors, librarians, and we have great content every other month. It's published 6 times a year from people like David and Liz and Pamela. Carrie says she's not a personal subscriber, but possibly our collection librarian is. So yeah, if you're not a subscriber, take a look. We've got a really robust website with lots of content that's open access. We have a few things that are subscriber-only content. That's the print journals that we put online for subscribers, but a lot of stuff is open. Really good content. So if you're not a subscriber, take a look at our website and check out Against the Grain. Okay, well, with that, I am going to turn things over to our presenters. I will be here monitoring the chat box, and I'll help with the Q&A, so I'll still be around in the background. But our first presenter is going to be David Bender. David is the Manager of Medical Ontology for the Radiological Society of North America. In this position, he works with the creation and application of controlled vocabularies for such diverse projects as semantic enrichment, data warehousing, and structured reporting. David has been the library director for the William D. Block Memorial Law Library, 19th Judicial Circuit, State of Illinois, and for the Skokie Branch campus of the Sanford Brown College. He's done indexing, taxonomy work for the Philosophers Index, Commerce Clearinghouse, Inc., the American Bar Association, and LexisNexis. So thank you very much for being here, David. The floor is yours. Let's get your slides going.
Okay. The genesis of, we need to, don't want people to see ahead of time, but the genesis of this paper actually happened probably about 10 years ago. It was at Illinois Library Association annual meeting, and there was listening to yet another one of the, librarians' days are dated. We're all going to be history, blah, 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 blah. I've never liked those, and I think people say those kind of things because they misunderstand the difference between the tools that we use versus the principles of librarianship. And in fact, the principles of librarianship are more important than ever, and the application of them will lead us to many more occupations than people really know about. And that's why I'm here talking today about what we do at RSNA with our controlled vocabularies. And there is a very big, very important role, I think, for librarians in taxonomy and the related artificial intelligence. It is drawing more and more heavily on taxonomy because the problem is just too many people are just dropped into it. They need somebody to do a taxonomy, so they pull a secretary, they pull a programmer or whatever who's got a few extra minutes, and they just have people work on the stuff when in fact what they really need is a person who is experienced with more traditional, for lack of better terms, cataloging and taxonomy indexing experience. To understand, I need to tell you a little bit about who we are at RSNA to understand why my position exists as it does, and in essence, how we are able to do what we do. We're over 100 years old. We have over 54,000 members in 136 countries across the globe. Actually, about a third of our membership is no longer in North America, and our annual meeting generally will have about 55,000 attendees. We are, when it comes to radiology, we're the proverbial 500-pound gorilla in the room. So fortunately, a lot of our initiatives are able to be very fruitful because we have that kind of influence and because we're drawing from people across, literally across the world, and who have connections with great organizations that supplement a lot of what we do with the ontology people at Stanford University and other places. We do have, this slide is actually a little incorrect. We have 2 main journals right now, but we are in the process of introducing 3 more. They're going to be just online journals. Radiology comes out 12 times a year, and it is our pure research journal. Radiographics is the continuing education journal, and it comes out 6 times a year with a special 7th issue every October on a given subject. But we're going to be having these 3 new web journals on artificial intelligence, cardiothoracic imaging, and cancer imaging. And our materials can be viewed. You don't have to be a member. You can go sign up at our website. I'll give you the URL a little later. And there is a 6-month embargo on it, but other than that, you can see all the stuff. And some of it is very accessible. Some, of course, is just way above everybody's head, except for maybe 5 radiologists across the world who really understand that stuff. So what is an ontology? I've got a definition here. You can peruse that at your leisure because these slides will be available after the presentation. The best way to sum up what an ontology is it's really just a glorified cataloging classification schema with all of the scope notes built right into it. So you'll have whatever the concept is, and then you'll have a lot of things related to it. For instance, it might have an organ, and might be the stomach, and it'll have a bunch of different properties, like the esophagus drains into it, the stomach drains into the intestines, and so on. So our main controlled vocabulary project is RADLEX, or the Radiological Lexicon. It is aiming to be the definitive model of radiology language. Much like any other community, depending on where you are, where you went to school, everybody has different terms for the same concept. When I was back getting library schooled, we always called them pathfinders. Some people call them tracer bullets. Some call them subject guides, but they're all a document that you use for assisting you with your research. But you can somebody call it one thing and people are going, what are you calling that? Unfortunately, that same thing happens with medicine. So we are creating, or I should say we have created, RADLEX. And the first application of RADLEX, of this uniform language, was to the Structured Reporting Program, the Radiology Reporting Initiative. One of the big problems that radiologists have had over the years is, a physician refers a patient to them, they do the imaging study, and then they do a report that gets sent back to the referring physician. For every radiologist, there is a different way of doing that report, and there's no consistency among them. Sometimes the important findings were buried deep down, sometimes they were up at the top, but generally it was always in a different place somewhere. With structured reporting, all of the information is in the same place with every report, and is equally important, everyone is using the same terminology. This is kind of an example of what a structured report looks like. They are actually web tools. They go on to, because pretty much all imaging is digital now, and so it's got all the different fields. And another way of looking at it is just think of it as a MARC record, because everything on this report functions the same way as a MARC record would. Instead of having a title, you're going to have your cardiac MRI right heart failure. Instead of author, clinical information, and instead of all, publisher, number of pages and all that stuff, you're going to have your blood pressure, blah, 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 all down the line. The next step after creating the structured reports is they created what is called Playbook, which has taken those structured reports and aligned them with procedure codes. If you're not familiar with strategic codes, if you're not familiar with procedure codes, they are, a string of numbers that are used essentially to slide information back and forth. If you ever want to know how important a procedure code is, if you've ever gone for a medical procedure and they have messed up the procedure code, you'll understand completely, because I went one time to the emergency room and they didn't even put in the codes, and for like 2 or 3 months I was being hounded by the insurance people because they wouldn't pay the insurance because they didn't have the codes, and I had to get on the healthcare people to fix that. One of the advantages of having these standardized codes, and again, that was another thing, just as every doctor had their own way of doing a report, every hospital had its own code. And so all the numbers were, imagine if instead of having, your Dewey Decimal or your Library of Congress numbers, if every library had their own cataloging system. That's essentially what was happening in the medical profession. So they've sat down and kind of universalized the codes across all of, or we're working on doing that. Not everybody's on board yet, but we're moving towards that. And I know you're thinking, what do you mean they haven't done this before? It's kind of scary, but yeah, this what librarians have been doing for 100 years or more. A lot of fields are just finally figuring out that they really need to get into this. But one of the great downstream innovations that has happened with this is the American College of Radiology Dose Index Registry, what has happened now that you have consistent naming throughout all of the different codes, when you do an imaging procedure, that is automatically uploaded to the dose index registry. And so it knows what the procedure was. Other information in the system will tell you what kind of institution you're coming from, what the what the radiation levels were, and other information that doesn't violate any of the HIPAA things. And every 3 months or so, radiologists get a report telling them how their dosage compares to their peers in a given area. And dosage will really depend upon the location in the country and the kind of institution. Academic institutions and private hospitals tend to treat people who are traditionally more fit, and so there's less weight, and so they don't need as much ionizing radiation in doing a procedure. Public hospitals tend to have larger people. The place in the country where you're at, people will vary by size, but the doctors can then see, well, where am I fitting in with my peers? Am I using too much radiation? Do I need to lower the amount? Or, hey, I'm right in where I need to be, and my patients are getting the safest dosage we can give them. And what ended up happening, Dr. Wang, who is the head of the RADLEX project at this time, he found 224 different procedure names from 60 different sites that are now subsumed under one playbook name, RPID 266. And imagine if you were trying to compile any kind of data, trying to filter 224 different names into one. The playbook has been a blessing. Another offshoot of the RADLEX project is common data elements. I don't want to go too much into that, but just the importance of what a common data element is. If you ever saw the movie Spinal Tap, they want to do a Stonehenge thing, and the guy draws out what he wants, and he marks it 18 by 18, except he wasn't paying attention to the data element, and he marked it inches instead of feet, and so what happened on stage you see in the other picture. It's funny when it's people dancing around a plinth on a stage. It's not funny when a dosage of medicine is multiplied by 10 times because somebody didn't use the right unit. Now, another thing that why it's really, really, really good to have a experienced library information science person is knowing when you need to standardize, knowing when you need not to. Unfortunately, at the time, right before I started, RSNA thought RADLEX was a one-size-fits-all. We'll just use it for absolutely positively everything. Well, it actually really is not a one-size-fits-all. We had to end up bifurcating our taxonomy projects, and we have to have one for our structured reporting, and we need to have a second one for our publications. RADLEX is really good because it tells you what the terms ought to be, but it isn't really good in tagging things and identifying what terms people are actually using. Theoretically, somewhere down the road, those two streams will merge and people will be using the official terms. But until that time, we need a second set of terms for our tagging, because I found out that through a number of different reasons, only about 15 to maybe 20%, I think, of RADLEX terms were actually found in our journal content. And this really hurt the retrieval because we have a related content widget. Whenever you go into any of our journal articles on the right sidebar, when you pull up an article, the article is tagged, it has created what's called a fingerprint, and it's compared against all the other fingerprints. in all of the other journal articles, then brings up in our widget all of the related articles or continuing education products and digital posters from the annual meeting. So, for instance, if you're looking at the article on imaging of ancient Egyptian animal mummies, it brings up scenes from the past multi-detector CT of Egyptian mummies of the Redpath Museum. Last but not least, as a librarian, we are ideally suited for the topic of peer review management. Now, everybody knows on one level what peer review is. Every librarian learns what a peer review journal is very early on and why they're such wonderful resources. I certainly knew what they were before I started here, but if you would have asked me, well, how does peer review happen? I could have given you a couple, I think maybe this way, that way. But it is actually a process that is tailor-made for all of us. You all remember the reference interview. You have the patron, they're coming in with an information need, and that information need is found somewhere in the collection of material in your library. And you as the librarian are the intermediary between the information needs of the patron and the information of the collection, and you talk with your patron, find out what exactly do they need. Let's go through the materials, let's see what we have. That is exactly what happens in the peer review process. Authors come in with their manuscripts that need peer reviewing. And as a peer review manager, you need to find out what exactly is that manuscript all about. In the process, the authors have a chance to pick terms to describe what their manuscripts are all about. But you can imagine how successful that is if you want to compare it against your typical patron. As you know, they come in, I need a book on mammals, when what in fact they need is something on the lower leg of the beaver or something like that. Then we have this big, huge database of peer reviewers who each one has their own specialty and expertise. And so you have to serve as the intermediary, finding out what does this manuscript really need? What reviewer really can review that manuscript? And so that pretty much sums up. I go into far more detail on all of these things in my paper that will be in the journal. Just wanted to quickly point out, though, before I finish, if you ever end up needing to go and get a radiology procedure, go to radiologyinfo.org. We do that in conjunction with the American College of Radiology. And it is great for answering layman questions for all of any questions you might have about a radiology procedure. And there's also the pubs.rsna.org is where our journals are. And as I said, after a 6-month embargo, you can view the articles for free, but you do have to register. We're not going to do anything nefarious with your data. So back to you, Leah, if there are questions.
Thank you very, very much for the presentation. Everybody, you can send in your questions now. We have about 5 minutes to ask questions for David's portion of the presentation before we get started with Liz. So you can use the attendee chat, or there's a green kind of a question mark icon that says ask the presenter a question. Either one of those would be fine. But go ahead and we'll field questions for the next couple of minutes or so.
I noticed one of the people here was with chem abstracts, and so we could probably have a lot of overlap there. There's a lot of stuff going on there down in Dublin.
Well, I can start doing the intro for Liz, and if we get any other questions coming in, we'll also have some time at the end for wrap-up. Something that's brought up later on may spur a question for David's part at that point also. Let's see. Okay, question from Ramune. What professional networks do you find the most helpful, David?
Ramon will probably, I don't know, maybe she may or may not like this. I've actually personally found the Special Library Association a far more valuable way of networking. And I see her at all the SLA events, so she knows I really like SLA, and not just because the former executive director was named David Bender. No relation. But I think that's going to probably vary from chapter to chapter across the country, because I'm sure that in some places there are some really strong MLA chapters and other state organizations. But as far as directly relating to my work here, really our strongest network is our membership. We have 54,000 members. It's really easy to find people who are from a base that big. We get a lot of volunteers, and we got a lot of really good, really sharp people helping us.
Wonderful. Thank you. Question from Meredith. Can you explain what you mean about not assigning just anyone to do taxonomies? Who is best suited to this work, and what skills should they have? That's a good question.
Well, I would hope that my presentation kind of answered that the best person to assign to it is a trained librarian information scientist. Subject area specialty isn't always necessary, whereas somebody who has a lot of experience with structure of schematic systems, that is really far more important, in the kind of rules that go with creating those systems, when those rules ought to be violated. As far, because there are rules about repetition of the same terms in parent and child nodes in taxonomy or in ontology. Sometimes you want to avoid them, sometimes you want to have it, but those are the kind of things that come with training in library sciences. And what are the different options for creating knowledge organization, knowledge schematics.
Okay, thank you. That question. And the question from Ramon just made me realize that I have been remiss in thanking her, because she is the guest editor of this health sciences issue. She put the thing together completely, and I wanted to say thank you to her for connecting me with authors and making the webinar possible. So thank you very much. And Meredith also said that's a helpful reply, asking us because I have to make this argument in my institution. So thank you for answering, David. And now I'm going to get started with Liz, our next presenter. So Liz Lorbeer is Chair, Department of the Medical Library, Library Director, and Associate Professor at Western Michigan University Homer Stryker MD School of Medicine. Liz began her role as the Library Director for WMed in 2013. Her career spans over 20 years as a librarian and administrator. She's previously held positions at Boston University, Rush University Medical Center, State University of New York at Buffalo, the University of Alabama at Birmingham. She is the president of the Michigan Health Sciences Library Association, elected board member to both the Medical Library Association and the Society of Scholarly Publishing, and the principal investigator to 4 National Network of Libraries of Medicine Express Library Digitization Award grants. Wow. Thank you very much, Liz. I'll get your slides started, and then you can take it away from there.
Thank you very much for inviting me today. I really appreciate it. Again, my name is Liz, and I had the wonderful opportunity to write another follow-up article to my 2014 piece in Against the Grain about our Born Digital Library here at Western Michigan University Homer Stryker MD School of Medicine. So a lot of people have asked me, why did you write a follow-up article? And I like to tell people it's been a few years, part of this experiment of a Born Digital Library. I've gotten many questions over the years, like, how is it going? Is it still working? Are you still Born Digital? And I felt at this point we had our institution had received full accreditation. So the medical school had received full LCME accreditation. We were awarded 5 years for that accreditation. Our regional accreditation, which is HLC, had given us accreditation there. We're a year ahead of ourselves. So I felt this was a good time to kind of wrap up our whole Born Digital. It has been working. What are the things that work for us? What are our successes? And what are some of the bumps that we've hit? We're 5 years old. We turned 5 in May. So this piece that I wrote for Against the Grain really is just kind of celebrate our successes, and also to tell people who are going to be building Born Digital libraries or are in the process where some of the bumps have been. So our Born Digital strategy was not to own content. That's really hard to swallow when you're a librarian because you're used to acquiring materials. And every year when I go to the Charleston conference, there's excitement about acquiring new materials, seeing new products. And so we take a different approach here at Western Michigan. We don't actually own the content. Now, I should be clear to tell you that I'm at a school of medicine. This is a medical library. So we typically use published journal literature the last 5 to 10 years. We're not book users. And I usually have to explain this to other colleagues who might not be familiar with medical libraries. Most of our core clinical medical textbooks are tied up in these aggregated databases. So we can't really just go out and buy a book. We have to buy a database. So we have several databases. So our collection is, of course, leasing content and then buying these databases of books. We employ agile systems and platforms to support mobile device use. Our users in medicine and clinical medicine are mobile users. They're very strong mobile users. We're primarily a tablet and smartphone clientele. So our clerkships use our 3rd and 4th year of medical school, or the clerkships, they use tablets and smartphones. Our residents use smartphones. And our clinicians, of course, are using smartphones. They're also using laptop computers throughout the clinical area. So we are not your traditional desktop users. We also at this library do not have an archival mission. Someone who, again, who's been a librarian for many years, who made sure in license agreements that we had archival copies. We don't worry about this here. We do not have an archival mission. We are just too new. It's just not possible to have this type of mission. It's best left for more traditional libraries in the region. We have the National Library of Medicine. So we just don't worry about that. So what do we do instead? We don't have an archive. We access articles through, of course, DocLine. We use interlibrary loan, which, if you think about it, is one of the largest databases out there for us to access content that we don't own and do resource sharing. We use the Get It Now and Reprints Desk. And if you're not familiar with Reprints Desk, I think one of the sales reps is listening today. I like to say it's the Jimmy John's of article delivery. It is freaky fast. Okay. Whoops, I lost my arrow to move forward. Oh, there it is, sorry. So I thought to make this kind of interactive because it is 2 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time, and sometimes there's a slump in the day. I thought we'd have a chat box for questions for the audience. So before I move on in my talk, I thought I'd just throw out 2 questions. Dream big. If you had 9 months to build a new digital, and let's make it a subject library, a medical, nursing, humanities, art library from scratch, where would you begin? So if you had a clean slate, where would you begin? And then I like to toss this up because people like to ask me on the side, how much money do you think you'd need to start your digital library? And so I thought we could just put that in the chat box and we can have a quick discussion, and then I'll move on in the presentation. Okay, so while I wait for people to type in, no problem. There are a lot of new born digital libraries coming on board. Some of them are done in 9 months. I had 9 months. Some people have taken longer. Oh, I have a question here. Danielle says she thinks she would need $2 million. So I'm going to share with you that I was only given to start this library $253,000. Not a lot of money to start a library. So you have to kind of work with what you have. So this is why our library looks the way it does. It's all demand driven because we run it very efficiently. We don't have a really large budget to do that. Oh, I like someone put Clinical Key. Yes, Clinical Key does have a lot of content in it. Access Medicine as well. So great. Oh, Kathleen mentioned that there's a lot of useful resources looking for free resources. Yes, you can definitely tap open source resources and open access. And I write in my article about Unpaywall and using those resources. Unpaywall is a way to look for freely available material using Google Scholar as well. Those are some of the kind of secrets that we use to kind of find free content on a small budget when we got started. Okay, I'm going to just move on. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the setup. Born Digital, built from scratch. We have separate IP ranges from our and a website. Actually, we're separately administrated from our academic library. They do support us. We do collaborative. When I mean support us, that we do collaboration in collection resource sharing. So we do get more materials that way. As I like to say, we're better together. So we do that. Our website is designed to be mobile centric. Originally, when I came 5 years ago, I was tasked with building a website for just a mobile device. Unfortunately, we are still very desktop centric, but we are right now in the midst of redesigning our library's website to be more mobile centric. We use Serial Solutions products from ProQuest to run like our back office, and it's our linker. And we also use LibGuides for our public website. So we do not use the university's website. We use SpringShaker. It's a little bit more agile for us, and we can make changes faster than what the institution can do for us. And then last, we use Browsing to promote our journal collection. And we use Browsing on our mobile devices as well to kind of serve up that content to our users. We are really large consumers of Browsing, and we've liked that for the last few years. We run, again, Serial Solutions for the knowledge base, and almost all of our solutions are demand driven. And what I really like about that is in a matter of minutes, I can take any publisher or any vendor out there. I can take, for example, I see Wendy Bonson's on from R2. I can take the whole R2 library. I can flip it on in Serial Solutions in the knowledge base, and I actually can provide my users all of that access. So all of the books online books that are available through that vendor, through PDA or demand driven, I can turn that on. So I like to say our library has about 200,000 books, but honestly, we probably only own like 1,000 of them. So I have a lot of content, but we don't own it. I feel something like Uber and Airbnb, sort of like that. You know, we have a lot, but we don't own it. And then, you know, we're running really complex library systems with a staff of about 4.5 FTE. So we have to really make sure that the care and feed of our digital library does not kind of put a lot of constraints on us. So, but I'll talk about that a little bit further on today. But we have these very complex systems, and we need to make sure that they're very agile, they're very easy for us, and there's a lot of functionality that we don't use because we just don't have the FTE to manage that. Okay. So next, for the chat box, questions for the audience. What skills should an information provider have in order to build, implement, and support a born digital library? So what skills do you think should be out there? And what skills are you looking for? in the people you manage or yourself? And my next question is, should vendors and library schools team up to teach the next generation of librarians? How do we kind of prepare our workforce for our digital libraries? Many of us still have print, but that is becoming a smaller collection and not as a dominant collection as it used to be for us years ago. So what skills do we need? And I put that question out there because I've always thought it's interesting that the information schools and the vendors don't work together to kind of offer some type of interesting degree or specialty in being a digital strategist, being a ERM librarian. Okay, we have some questions out here. Future thinking skills. Yes, vendors should be included in library education. That's from Danielle, and I agree. So we need to really think about including our vendors and our publishers and welcome them into our library schools to kind of help us to prepare for our future and how to use those wonderful systems out there. Dee Dee writes, computer science knowledge, experience, and critical thinking skills. You're absolutely right, Dee Dee. I just hired someone a few months ago who's actually a computer scientist, just because the systems have become so complex that we actually need a computer scientist now. So I do agree. Those are skills that some of those computer science coding skills are not being taught right now, and they're so desperately needed. I like Carrie. We definitely can learn from each other, and I agree. That's why I like the Charleston Conference so much. Ramuna writes, agility, flexibility, calmness under pressure. I agree. And it's really nice to hear from you, Latisa. I see that you've written good bargaining skills would be important when dealing with the vendors. That's absolutely true. You have to be, as I like to say, the price line negotiator. So absolutely. These are just wonderful items that you've added to the chat box. I'm going to move to the next slide. Managing the Bibliomatrix. So my nickname for my library is actually the Bibliomatrix. So I was watching, about 2 years ago, I was watching The Matrix, the movie with Keanu Reeves, and I thought a lot about it. I was like, gosh, if I was to kind of think about my library, it's a Bibliomatrix. And not to say that I'm Keanu, or the lady in the red dress, though I think we all want to be the lady in the red dress. But we are managing a Bibliomatrix for our users. And our library is now everywhere. So we're not just a fixed point. We're not a destination anymore. We're really everywhere. And we're also like free-range librarians. We don't have as many service points of service anymore. Many of us are embedded. Many of us live in different buildings with people that we work with who are not librarians. They could be faculty, students. So we are definitely more immersed in our environment. Again, our learners and their mobile devices, we now need to communicate not only through email, but using other applications, using social media channels. So we need to get in touch with our users in many different ways and many different facets. And then my theme of my paper is that there's just fewer of us to organize and maintain our collections. It used to be that we could employ several people to work in our library, and unfortunately, due to constraints in higher education funding, that's not really true today. And the people that we do employ need to have a certain skill set in order to run our systems and to serve our users and our stakeholders. And I also will tell you that I think library systems are more complex, more complicated, more complex than they really should be. They're not as agile. We've asked our vendors and publishers for so much. We want them to do everything that they're very complex systems to actually install. And I find the systems that I have installed, we don't use all of the bells and whistles. I wish that we could, but we just don't have the staff. And honestly, we don't have the means. Many of the things that we've asked for in these complex systems is really steeped in having a print collection. And we now have an online collection. So I really hope in the future that we'll have more agile solutions for our systems, for our staff that is much smaller. And then last, as I said, we're rethinking how we buy content. We just don't buy things like we used to. We lease, we rent, we subscribe. Buying content for me is kind of like the last possible option. So we're really just consumers. It's very disposable. And again, in medicine, we only want the latest and greatest. And anything it's much older, we may be using for research, but we don't use as much. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. Oh, there you go. And then building the library for tomorrow's users. So what we have today is great, but tomorrow's library is going to be even better. We do have this rise of our mobile student learner. And what that means is that, we have more of our students who are matriculating in. They use their phones, they use their tablets, they use their laptops, to find information, but generally it's quick lookup, easily accessible. So we really have to start thinking about how do we make our website and our content easily accessible and for our users. I recently learned about RA21, which is authenticating users, making it easier to authenticate users onto their devices. I know that for many years I've used Easy Proxy, but as we know, Easy Proxy is not always easy. So that's something to think about, is how do we get users to use our material, be anywhere in the world, and have easy authentication. Also, making our collections social so they're findable in discovery tools, and apps that provide digestible knowledge. Because again, people like to look things up quickly. If you're like me and I'm not sure what someone is trying to tell me, I don't have a problem quickly doing a Google search or a wiki search. And we want to make sure that our library web pages are kind of front and center, that we can do that so that our users can find information. Last, skill set needed. I like to come back to that because I have been teaching in the iSchools, and I have been sponsoring interns, and it is so important that we are preparing for our future. The world is moving fast. Being a librarian means lifelong learning. It doesn't stop. Sometimes it's a little bit too much, but it doesn't stop. So how do we provide training at all stages of our careers, from someone who's just graduated from an iSchool all the way to a more seasoned librarian who's been practicing for many years? And how do we balance that with our vendors, with our publishers that we're learning together? Well, that was my last slide. I thought I would take questions from y'all.
Thank you so much, Liz.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Someone asked about RA21. If you Google RA21, you'll see that right now they're kind of in beta testing. It's another way of authenticating a user using a different type of strategy than VMS or Easy Proxy. Mm-hmm. Someone said, how much can consortium membership help limit cost of online resources? I will tell you that consortiums can help many times with shared pricing and sharing of that. There's positives to that. There can also be negatives. You can be locked into collections. You can be locked into services for many years and not have flexibility in your budget. We do use consortia here in the state, but there's many times, and I've also pulled out of a consortial deal because I felt that it was just kind of locking us down. Let's see, Ramuna said, come to the Health Sciences Lively Lunch in Charleston. One of the topics will be RA21. Okay, great. Definitely, that's a major plug to come to the conference. Are all of the 4.5 positions library positions? This is kind of interesting. I am the only card-carrying librarian. We have a information scientist. We have a computer scientist. We have somebody who has a baccalaureate in the social sciences, and we're right now looking to hire for another position. And that position does not require a library or information sciences degree. And we've gotten many people to apply with all sorts of degrees. And it's just been great and refreshing to see that there have been many people who do not have library degrees who have worked in libraries and can offer the same talent. So that's been fun. How much of an article access is, this is from John. How much percent? How much of article access is Get It Now, Reprints Desk? I can tell you that we do about a quarter of that. About a quarter of that is using Get It Now and Reprints Desk. And journal packages. We actually only have one journal package. And you're amazed that we run on that. That seems unreal to me. That's Danielle about our budget. That was our starting budget 5 years ago. Was $250,000 was our starting budget. It is unreal now. But to get started, you don't need that much money. So thank you.
Yes, thanks everybody for all the questions and the discussion. If there's a couple more questions that maybe we didn't cover, we'll wrap that up at the end. But I'm going to move on to our next presenter now, who is Pamela Rose. And let me get her slides going here. Pamela is Web Service and Library Promotions Coordinator at the Health Sciences Library at the University of Buffalo. Pam has worked at HSL for over 52 years. She has a BS in Medical Anthropology and MLS, both from University of Buffalo. She is also an avid volunteer. I love this list. She serves as a docent at the Buffalo Zoo, cat outreach coordinator and cat and dog behavior counselor for Pets Alive, Western New York, Therapy Animals of Western New York, board member and webmaster, SPCA Paws for Love program volunteer, along with her therapy dog, Sophia, who is a Bernese mountain dog. She lives in the historic Parkside neighborhood of Buffalo with her husband, Joel, her therapy dog, Sophie, 5 cats, and she has 4 grandchildren. We were talking a little bit before we went live this morning. We're both animal people, so we love talking to other animal folks. But thank you very much, Pam, for being here today, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Leah, and I appreciate the plug about animals. Thanks. So hi, everybody. Today I'm going to talk about One Health, and this is a topic that I am really passionate about. And just as to get started, and connecting the dots really has to do, you'll see as we go along with connecting all of the dots. But first, Leah's going to put out a poll question for me. I'd like to know how many of the attendees have actually heard of this concept. Let's see, okay. So most people have not. Okay, thank you. We can close that and I'll move on. So at least this will be new information for a lot of you. So I'm going to describe exactly what One Health is about. And it is an exciting concept, but it is such a large concept that it's difficult for those of us in librarianship anyway to figure out how to contribute in a meaningful way. So One Health actually was forged in 2008 formally, and it is a movement to forge co-equal, and I've put that in bold, co-equal, all-inclusive collaborations between everybody working in the healthcare field, in health and environmentally related disciplines, and that includes, and I've added here to that definition, ecologists, epidemiologists, microbiologists, public health professionals, and we'd probably include anthropologists in that as well. And if you read the article in the September issue, you'll see that I do discuss anthropologists' contribution there. Those of us who went to MLA in Boston in 2013, the theme of that conference was One Health, Information in an Interdependent World. And I think we're all critically aware these days that we are all dependent on one another, from the lowest amoeba up to the to ourselves, the dominant species on the planet. this may seem a little disparate as I talk about these things, but a lot of us are involved in interprofessional education. And these are collaborations among diverse disciplines where you bring these people together to learn each other's terminology and talk about, maybe do a little problem solving and kind of just opening their blinders up to a larger world. And we find, and the Health Sciences Library has been involved in this, we find that IPE-trained providers have more tools to solve healthcare problems. So One Health, as envisioned by its founders back in 2008, might be thought of as the ultimate IPE, a global collaboration with the potential to truly improve health worldwide. So why am I so passionate about this? So here's a trick question, and you can put this in the chat box. What do health sciences libraries, animal rescue, therapy dogs, and zoos have in common? And I'll let you respond to that. I don't see anybody responding. Okay, it is kind of a trick question. It is a tough one. Passionate caretakers. I love that, Danielle. Thank you. That is very true. All need information relating to animals. Cynthia really kind of hit it. But let me move on to the next slide in the interest of time. So the short answer is that I'm personally involved in all four of those arenas, as Leah mentioned in my introduction, and they've all somehow happily collided with my work. The intersection of all of these fields took place over the last 10 years or so. So I've been rescuing cats for many, many years and have done a number of cooperative rescue runs with my vets. And that led me to do research for my own vet, who also happens to be the vet at the marine the aquarium in Niagara Falls. So I get articles and do research for him. I've been a zoo docent since 2002, and I do research for our zoo vet before he goes on his field trips. My undergraduate degree, I'm still connected with the anthropology department. So when our zoo president came in, she wanted access to UV's library resources. And so I was able to get her, or help facilitate getting her, an adjunct faculty appointment. And then I have my own therapy dog, as you heard. And back in 2011, the Health Sciences Library was planning for stress relief events for our students. And our director at the time said, well, now's the time to bring animals into the library. And so we did bring therapy dogs in, and it was a huge and instant success, such that now, 7 years later, therapy dogs are being booked all across campus. And it's a very nice thing for a health sciences library to do, to show that not only do we provide support for research and information, but we care about the health of the patrons, and faculty and staff, and students. So that's how they all collided. I like to say my worlds collide. So being part of each of these fields, I'm familiar with their unique terminology, and it occurred to me that with all this IPE activity that we were doing, that's a critical key, as many librarians know. You do consumer health outreach, and you realize that they don't know medicalese, and when they start to understand it, they start to understand the culture behind it. So understanding those different fields of practice gives people a wider view. For example, treatments developed for animals may be applied to humans and vice versa, and actually there are some real-life examples of that. I think I do mention them in the article. So informal and formal IPE and collaboration leads to synergy and discovery, which only can benefit us all. And underlying the principles of One Health are these human-animal connections that have existed since time immemorial. I'm sure that Homo erectus had relationships with animals besides just eating them. Animal-assisted activities have been around for a long time. This is prescriptive therapeutic use of animals. It was documented as far back as 800 AD when the physically disabled were assigned to care for farm animals. This was in Geel, Belgium, as part of their therapy. Florence Nightingale, the founder of the profession of nursing in 1860, wrote in her Notes on Nursing that small pets were a good idea for chronic invalids. A small bird in a cage might be the only thing that that person could benefit from. And Sigmund Freud himself used one of his chows in his therapy sessions because he found that people opened up more. Animals have also led to major policy changes. After Hurricane Katrina, Red Cross had to alter their evacuation procedures because people refused to leave their pets behind. And as I mentioned, therapy animals are now widespread. And in fact, I do presentations with my therapy dog as part of my Therapy Animals of Western New York outreach to people in offices who just want to have health days for their employees. So we bring in a therapy dog and we talk about the whole idea of animals helping people. So the health of people is directly connected to and dependent on the health of animals. The raising properly and both humanely and making sure they're healthy of cattle, sheep, pigs, chickens, and other animals affects us. Every drug that has been used on humans was probably tested on animals first. Veterinarians are kind of leading the way in One Health, and they are key players in the raising of these animals and in your pets. Vaccinations are kept up to date. Zoonotic disease information is transmitted. That's a little play on words there. Certainly people are made aware of zoonotic diseases. Our local SPCA teaches a course on it. They can inform on the proper administration of antibiotics, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And some of you may have seen that Purdue heavily advertises for their organic chickens that they're raised without antibiotics, and they're putting oregano in their water. Well, that's not so far-fetched. They're using it as a heavy PR tool, but indeed, oregano does have properties that are beneficial. I'm not sure they're all doing that for all their chickens, but. Okay, so not only is the health of us directly connected to animals, but we're dependent on the health of the environment and its ecosystems and the proper functioning of those ecosystems. Agricultural and manufacturing practices are critical. Animal waste and chemical contamination can be a major problem. Most foodborne diseases, salmonella, we see the headlines of, of one restaurant or another, some food served traced to some lettuce produced at some facility, and so forth, are traced to manure contamination. Emerging vectors of disease are arising due to habitat loss by humans, and that's where ecologists and environmentalists come in to be a critical piece of the One Health movement, because we have to track and be aware when somebody cuts down a whole swath of forest to do cattle raising. All of the organisms in that area have to move somewhere else, and in the process they mutate and they can jump species. So that's really critical. So let's throw a poll question out there. What % of human disease arises from animal reservoirs? Let's see what people think. A lot of people are choosing the 30%. Oh, I like the 90% people. Okay, so most people think it looks like the 30% range. Well, the answer actually is it's 70%. And that isn't assuming that it's the bacteria, but we're talking about infectious organisms that live in animals and then are transmitted to humans. Rabies is a really good example that afflicts mammals, but there are many other zoonotic diseases. 70% is a pretty high figure. So you can see why One Health is critically important. We also know that nature itself affects emotional human health. And Lou wrote a book in 2008 called Last Child in the Woods, in which he identified nature deficit disorder. Children raised in concrete jungles really have problems and can can actually be helped by coming to zoos or going to nature preserves. We have one locally here called Rhinestone Woods and another one called Tick Farm, which educates kids. And E.O. Wilson, who's one of my favorite people, wrote a book in 1984 called Biophilia, and this is actually a biophilia hypothesis, which says that humans have an innate need to connect with other living things, whether you're growing a flower or petting a dog or talking to your neighbor. Humans need to do that. So that's the animal connection under One Health. Now, one of the things that has been most prevalent in the news and has been furthering the One Health agenda has been the antibiotics and resistance. It's a key theme. Some of you may not be aware that antibiotics are actually not regulated in many countries. They're simply available to purchase at the local drugstore. There's less focus on developing new antibiotics because many of the companies are focusing on cancer, drugs, and that sort of thing. There is no system in place to track this trend globally. Modern medicines are becoming obsolete, and there's this overprescribing issue. And when they are prescribed properly, patients often stop taking them too soon. There's a big education factor there. There's, of course, the unnecessary use in agriculture. Those get into the food chain. And poor infection control and poor hygiene. If you raise chickens in crowded conditions and they transmit infections, you throw antibiotics at them to solve the problem, which doesn't really, of course. So let's see. So those are just some of the key points underlying the One Health initiative. I know it's kind of quick and not in depth, but again, there's more information in the article with a lot of references and links. We did an exhibit here at the Health Sciences Library. It's still physically present in our exhibit cases, but you can also view it at the link on the slide that, and the slides are available after the presentation, so you can click it from there, or Leah could also throw it into the chat box. And it's also linked from our main exhibits page at the library's website. And again, the major focus of the One Health movement right now is the antibiotic resistance and also the microbiome. We had the privilege to partner with the Genome Institute downtown here for Antibiotic Resistance Week, partly because we had this One Health exhibit up. And it's interesting to note that an article that appeared in 2017 showed that the microbiome extends to plants as well. It's not just animals. And I was very excited yesterday as I was kind of browsing through my email that Medscape came up with this article that the Harvard medical students are now rotating through the Franklin Park Zoo to learn about treating animals and getting a whole different perspective about the fact that animals suffer from diabetes and heart conditions and many of the same things that people do, including postpartum depression and other mental health issues. And in fact, some of the treatments that have been developed by vets for animals are now being transferred to the human domain, which I think is very exciting. So we can see that cultural competence training not only applies in human culture, such as Native Americans and so forth, but in non-human arenas as well. So finally, librarians, I think, can contribute to this and facilitate furthering the One Health agenda through collection development. If you're primarily a health sciences library with no vet school, you can still look at the One Health initiative and look at things that you might collect or subscribe to that would, contribute to the whole. Research, creating live guides, there are quite a few out there now, and they're addressed in the article. Events such as student competitions in which you give prizes for students coming up with projects using a diverse group of students, whether it's, diversity through ethnicity or study. Data management is a big field. We're going to need data management as One Health moves forward, and libraries are getting involved in helping researchers learn how to do that more efficiently. We are doing that here at HSL. And then finally, recognizing possible connections. And I'll give you a real-life example as my last statement. When I saw this article about the Harvard Zoo experiment, because I know the zoo vet and I know some of the people in medical school, I sent an email connecting Dr. Voley with the head of the curriculum committee at the medical school, just suggesting that this might be something that our medical school in Buffalo might look at in the future, because our zoo is right here. Our medical school just moved downtown. They're even closer to it. So I think that would be a great thing to consider. And that would be all I have for today. And I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
All right, and Sam's question on One Health. I like the comment that Carrie had earlier that naturing is a thing in Japan. I like that term, naturing.
That's a great term. I like that too. Carrie says we have interprofessional groups working on this at OSU. Great. I can't remember exactly what links I included in the article. I hope that was one of them.
Any other questions?
Leah, you'll be including all the contact information for all of us, right?
I don't have it on a slide. What I will do is when I post the video and the slides on our website, I'll have contact information there.
Okay, great.
And my slide isn't working for the final. Oh, well, I just had a final closing slide to thank everybody. But yeah, that's the session will be recorded. The video and the slides will be posted on the conference website. All the contact information will be there. So I hope everybody will check that out. Thank you all for being here, for presenting. David, Liz, Pam, this was wonderful. After the session is over, attendees will be directed to a really short survey just to give us, I think it's like 4 questions, give us feedback on how we did and maybe give us some tips for session topics and speakers in the future. And don't forget to check out the September issue of Against the Grain and read all of these articles in full. This issue, thank you to Ramune for putting it together, for the guest editing, and thanks for being here today. And that'll wrap things up for us. Hope you have a good rest of your week, everybody.